Okay, so here to talk about an initiative at Lyrasis called It Takes a Village, and particularly the work we've been doing during the pandemic. So I work at Lyrasis. We're a membership organization, so we're always about what's going on with our members, what do they need, how can we help, how can we make things better. One of the things when I came into my new role, I was hearing a lot of support for open source, a lot of deep commitment among our institutions to open source, but some, concern, how are they going to be sustainable? We're going to put all these resources into it. What can we do to help? So we approached IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services in the United States, a funding agency, and they very kindly gave us funding for 2 projects, but overall it's about bringing OSS programs serving cultural heritage together to develop shared sustainability strategies and provide information needed to assess and contribute to sustainability. So the first phase was 2017 to 2019. And the main work was to survey the community, bring together a bunch of programs together in Baltimore, Maryland, and create a guidebook, and that ended in 2019. The next phase was a practical toolkit, and we're still in that right now. I always want to give a shout out to all the amazing people that have contributed, because that It Takes a Village thing isn't just words. It's not just the open source communities, but all the people that have contributed to the work we've done. We have an amazing advisory group, Rob Cardellano from Columbia, Tom Kramer from Stanford, Michelle Kimpton, who was at DPLA at the time, Catherine Skinner from Educopia, and Ann Baird Whiteside from Harvard. And then in the first phase, I used to have all the institutions that all the programs that participated, those icons are kind of small. I used to have them bigger and they went on 2 slides, and I was being ruthless and putting it all onto 1 slide. So everybody's there, but we really appreciate all of their work. So the first thing we did was a survey of 26 different programs, asking tons of questions about what the work they had done on sustainability. And in retrospect, maybe our expectations were a little goofy. Welcome. We really thought that we would find some themes throughout the programs, that the programs that were doing well and sustainable would have certain markers, like they would have a certain number of staff, or they would have a certain budget, or they had been around a certain amount of time. Is that delusional? I mean, wouldn't you think maybe there's like a secret sauce to sustainability? Anyway, that's what we were thinking. Not the case at all. The ones that were doing well and sustainable were all over the map. What we did see as common between the sustainable programs was the ones that had really looked at their community and understood the need that their community had and were constantly working towards serving that community need were the sustainable ones. The ones that found a cool technical solution and then went looking for the audience had a lot more trouble. The other thing I think we really found that if we break down the sustainable communities and look at all the parts, we'll find these are the 10 things you do, and Xanadu will be sustainable. And again, in retrospect, perhaps that was not quite thought through enough, but it really was. It's not one thing or a straight line. Sustainability tends to have phases that move together in facets, and we'll talk through those. So this is the beginning of the framework that we really developed initially. So when people think about sustainability for programs, they tend to think money. Money's important. That's really important for these programs, but it's only one element. And so we thought about what are the main elements, and these are a little squishy, they overlap, but the main ones were governance, technology, resources, and community engagement. Governance, librarians are great at this, figuring out what the rules are. How do we make decisions? Who gets to decide things? Technology is really about the software development and challenges that impact the development process in an open source context. The code is open, there's contributors, there's a difference between that and proprietary. Resources is really how you get the work done, whether you're getting volunteer resources or you're getting money to then pay staff to get the work done. And then the one probably closest to my heart is community engagement. This is really how you get people that are using the software to care about the software and the community. How do you get people that are using it, probably for free, to then be invested enough to really care about the community and what it's doing long term? So those are the different facets, which I said are not absolute bold lines. Our first icon for this was more like a tornado, which my co-chair and I thought was perfect because it really is a bunch of moving parts, but it was distressing to the advisory group that it kind of conveyed a chaos, which is true, but not helpful for a framework. So this has more bright lines in between. Then there are also phases. Any program, open source or other, goes through different phases. There's phase 1, getting started. This is where you're really trying to figure things out. You might have a grant, you might be in beta, it's probably a smaller team together. That second phase is growing. This is where you're taking that idea and some software and really working with the community. And this can take a long time. This could be a short period of time or 10 or 20 years. And this is where either it sticks or it doesn't. This is where you engage the community or you don't. So some just stay in phase 2. Phase 3 is where you're thinking this is working. Like you're not fretting every year about it. You feel like, okay, we got an audience, they seem to like it, we have participants, things could always go astray, but I'm feeling good. You should beware. That's where you really have to think, of course, what you're doing is working now, but these things evolve. And so you need to think about, are there changes around the corner? Maybe your solution was perfect when you started, but now there's other competitors. Maybe the need is being met in other ways. Maybe the community, some of the really key stakeholders, like library deans or an amazing developer, has moved on. So being aware that you might need to regroup and go back around in the phases. And this is where we put it together. So I know it's a lot to absorb altogether, but it's governance, technology, resources, and community, trying to convey that it's not your whole program is in phase 1 or your whole program is in phase 3. It might be that governance is in phase 1 and technology is in phase 2 and resources is in phase 3. That'd be a particularly weird model, but theoretically it could happen. And I think it helps when you first look at this, you might think, okay, we've assessed and our governance is here and our technology is here, but maybe come back next year and think, our governance was at phase 2 and we really want to work on getting that to phase 3. So it's a way to break it down so you're not just, there's so much to do. There is a lot to do, but we don't have to do it all right now. Focus on what you need to do. And I'm just going to point out, in the heart is community. That's the heart of it all, always. So that's really kind of what came out of the Baltimore Forum, the 26 programs being represented by, I think, 46 different people. Our advisory group really came and created that framework and also created some objectives, like if you're in governance phase 1 and you want to get to phase 2, these are the things to do. And we're really about this guidebook, helping cultural heritage programs that are working with OSS plan for long-term sustainability, ensuring resources will be available at levels sufficient for the software to remain viable and effective as long as it is needed versus forever. Because you said we could give a little anecdote, I'm going to take my time. I think when we proposed this to IMLS, we thought what we'd producing would be closer to like a cookbook of, and I'm not a cook, so this is not a real recipe, please don't try this at home. Like a cup of flour and a cup of sugar and a spoonful of milk and blend and put in the oven for an hour at 350. I'm sure that's an awful recipe, but we thought we'd be able to say like, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be on a track. And it really is more of a guidebook. Like, hey, you like art. You're going to France. You should check out the Louvre. Go on Tuesday mornings, take the side door, that kind of thing. Like these are some general things to do. That's available at that URL. You can download it. We're thrilled. It's freely available for anybody. People gave us great feedback. They were very happy to have this conceptual framework, really helpful. Some of them started doing it right away. And then other people kind of said, like, this is great. How do I do it? What exactly do I do to, like, assess where we are with governance? So we approached IMLS, and they were very kind and gave us some additional funding to create It Takes a Village in practice. So the guidebook is, I'm not going to say theoretical, but it's a framework. In practice is tools and activities to really help programs with very practical help with sustainability planning. Megan Forbes, my, I keep saying co-chair, co-director, very practical people. So these are all meant to be like here. I'm going to give you just our overall, it's just pretty. So I'm going to show you the, but also because IMLS was really serious about us iterating on the process. They did not want us to go into the cave and come back in 2 years and have the perfect thing. It was keep improving. So the idea was to do a workshop for each facet. If I had a pointer, I would point to the workshop level, and then kind of take that feedback, refine, do beta testing with the activities, and then find, oh, that didn't work the way we thought. Do it again. Then pilot it across different programs, and then iterate again, and then release it more fully in winter. The tools are all available now, but we're still really in the testing phase. So I'm going to put my plug in now. If anybody is interested in testing, if you're an open source program, or honestly, even if you're not, love the feedback. So what we highlighted in the proposal for this session is how we handled the COVID elements during this. We started right when COVID did. And so there was a choice to say like, well, we can just postpone the whole project 2 or 3 years, which was not helpful. Everybody was very interested in this work. So the original proposal for a lot of the work was, let's do these 4 in-person workshops. Each one will have 10 to 12 participants. So like governance will have 10 to 12 people that have done great governance work in their programs. Get them together and do a lot of creative brainstorming. You know, they'll be hosted by our advisory group. So we'd have a group at Stanford, one in New York. Of course, the world locked down. Nobody was traveling anywhere, so we had to adapt, which we should have on a shirt somewhere. You know, we've all adapted. So instead of in person, we went to online workshops with virtual hosts. And it was really tricky to think about how you shift that content. Being in person, being creative is one thing. Trying to get anybody's attention. And honestly, the first workshop, I think, was the week after we figured out who won the election in the US. So like the 2 weeks before was just an incredibly stressful time of not knowing things. So just getting anybody to focus for even an hour online was a real challenge. And instead of trying to be creative with panic-stricken COVID people, instead, Megan and I really tried to create things that people could respond to, some straw men that they could respond to, and trying to make it easier for them to participate. So as an example, so for the governance workshop, if you knew you were trying to get from phase 1 to phase 2, you're in this early beta stage, but you really want to go to that growing stage, the moving forward objectives include defining a need for governance, reviewing existing governance models, selecting the governance model that works best, and communicating changes to stakeholders. So like, define a need for governance. Great, how would I do that? So in these virtual workshops, we discussed activities, tools, resources that their programs were found useful when they were doing it. These were all people that had successful governance programs, and so what had they done to get there? So one of my favorites for governance is catastrophizing, which people really resonated with during COVID. So it was like, okay, what would happen if your main financial contributor decided they hated open source and go proprietary? Or what if your funder changes directions? Don't solve that problem, but who solves the problem is how you define why you need governance. If this is like a blip and nothing happens, you've got great governance. But just figuring out who makes those decisions is a way to get to defining your need for governance. So we'd ask them, like, would this be useful? What would you improve? What would you change? Would it achieve our intended results? I was wildly surprised that they didn't want to kill any of them. They just wanted to fix all of them. So they were very engaged in trying to make these great. So some lessons learned in this. I think we've become very accustomed to the word pivoting. We're all going to pivot. And that sounds easier than it is. We really had to work very hard to make sure that all voices could be heard online. In a room, there's a discussion and a flow that kind of happens, and online, some people start unplugging or getting distracted, or they don't feel as comfortable as others. So really trying to make it, instead of one full day in in person. It was two-hour sessions on consecutive days, making it, they just had to respond, trying to minimize the pre-work. We did find some silver linings. Because travel wasn't an issue, we had funding to help support financially travel, but that, as we all know, with increased sensitivity to all the issues going on in the world, it's not just about the money. It's about somebody who's in Australia, and it's like, it's really not worth it for me to travel to a one-day meeting. It's about the person who has family commitments, who it's just really hard to be away for 2 days. And so we were freer in casting a wider audience, and people were able to participate in a virtual one and better. And the one I was kind of, I don't know why, surprised by was one of our participants has a hearing impairment. And so online meetings like this, those hallway conversations are just incredibly difficult for her. And so because it was online with a headset, with controlled environment, it was easier for her to participate. She did miss the serendipitous hallway conversations, but such is life. The other thing is the conversion rate. So we put out a call for proposal for testing, and we're kind of thrilled to be overwhelmed with people that wanted to test. And we had originally said we're going to accept 2 for each facet. We got far more than that. We didn't want to say no, so we're like, okay, we'll fix things so that everybody that wants to participate can participate. And we'd reach out to them like 6 months later and like, are you ready to test? And they're like, what's this again? Did I agree to something? What? I don't have time for this. You know, it's the realities of working with COVID. So a lot of people were just literally didn't remember what they agreed to, or had different priorities. All these programs were under massive stresses. Every organization was under financial stresses, and so just didn't have the time that they thought they would. So because of that, I really, really want to strongly thank those who were able to participate and test to some degree. I'm sure I missed somebody, so I apologize, but we really appreciate everyone's participating. I'm happy to take a few minutes of questions, and then I think we'll also have time for questions in the end.
Round of applause for Laurie. Thank you very much.
And again, URL.
So we will now open for a couple of questions, both in the room and from our participants online. If you just had a couple of questions, just based on Laurie's presentation and some of the work that she has presented on, or any comments. Any questions?
And I'm serious about if you want to test. Like all that content is on the wiki, but we'd love to get feedback.
I had a quick question. I was just curious when you're talking about the so all the different volunteers that you reached out to do the testing and these initial calls. What types of programs, if you could just talk about 1 or 2, were you working with? So who were these sort of, was it all of the different organizations on the slide?
Those were the organizations that have tested or beta tested or piloted in some way. So we really wanted diverse groups, you know, small ones, big ones, ones that worked with museums, ones that worked with archives, ones that are brand new, ones that have been around a while, ones that had paid staff, ones that had completely volunteer staff.
So what types of roles, who at these programs typically did you engage with? Just sort of, is it developers? Is it community engagement people? Is it just interested?
Yes.
Right.
So depending, if I had to pick one group, probably governance, because they're the ones that are, you know, looking long term. But lots of times the technology activities are very trying to figure out development or features, and so the development people would be more involved. For community engagement, I had one of our people say, like, I loved this. Instead of just responding, she actually said, one of the activities that is missing is how to figure out what to stop doing for community engagement. Because all we do is do more and more, because we're all about the community and responding to that need. But how do you assess what to stop doing?
Right.
So so we've tried to kind of get the people doing the work for each of the elements.
Okay. Do we have any questions on the Slido? No. Well, thank you very much, Laurie. We'll just move on to the next talk. And again, if you think of questions,